So we probably should start to wrap it up. I'll just make a few comments here at the end. The operation of a TV depends upon the underlying properties of complex objects. And so to have a complete understanding, you have to trace everything back to what are those complex objects, what are their properties, what are their cause-effect interactions with one another, and you can get a complete description of the system. This is possible. And it doesn't involve God. There's no God that we need to put into that description. Properties are exhibited in cause-effect relationships. They're not independent. In other words, a cause and effect relationship is just saying that event X is always followed by event Y. Or without event X, Y doesn't occur. Or X is necessary or sufficient for Y. It just is a description of the regularities that go on, and dependent upon the properties of the underlying objects themselves. In other words, if you take an electron and shoot it at a proton, the electron and the proton each have their own individual properties. But if you put them together, there's a certain outcome of that which occurs. Same way with water, H2O. You take 2 atoms of hydrogen, a gas at room temperature, and 1 atom of oxygen at room temperature, which is a gas. You put them together in a certain way. What do you get? You get a liquid at room temperature. And so therefore this combination water does depend upon the properties of the underlying elements. You don't get water if you put different elements together. You get something different. So now the question is, how do properties emerge when you make combinations? I claim there's no answer to that. You can't go beyond that. You can only describe what the properties are that result from the combination.
Okay. I think that yes, I accept the causal or relationship in the sense that there is a certain mechanism and you test this mechanism, it works, and it actually gives you a certain sequence of chain of events. I don't deny that. But the point is that, but to claim when you look the cause and to look at this connection and then to claim that this connection is actually the cause and is the source of what you see there, it is a great mistake. And I think that's one of the biggest scientific mistakes we do. To me, it's no different than to say that because of the connection between remote control and what you see on TV, that what you see comes from remote control. It's absolutely wrong to make such claim. And I think it's the same thing, that when you know, everything that we observe, it seems like comes through such connection. When you discover the remote control to get certain thing, you press on it, you get something which related to this material cause, but which is completely different than this material cause, which cannot be attributed to the material cause, as in the case of remote control and documentary on TV screen. Yes, it's related, it comes after you initiate that process, but you cannot attribute this documentary to remote control. Same thing I will say. Now, when you get water, of course, it's like remote control. You bring the hydrogen and oxygen in a certain way, you get water. Now, your point is that because hydrogen and oxygen has property, is not scientifically accurate now. That is the scientific knowledge now that we know that actually the properties of those hydrogen and oxygen are not sufficient enough to give the property of waters. That's why the concept of emergence come into play. So to me, in this case, it's like the same thing. You get a salt. You get a sodium and chlorine in a certain way, and you get salt. The key is that when you look at sodium and chlorine, and if you try to eat them, each one of them is actually deadly poison for you. It can kill you. You get the sodium alone or chlorine alone to a certain amount, it will kill you. Now, you combine them, amazingly, something come out of this, and there's no poisonous property. It's not poisonous anymore. It is very nutritious. It's very delicious. Now, I think to me that's a clear sign to our mind saying that that apparent cause is not the real cause of what you get it. So open your eyes and look and see who is behind this broadcasting.
Well, your final sentence shows that you're begging the question again. You say, look who is behind this. Who is begging the question because you're assuming that there is someone behind it. There may not be anybody behind it. In fact, that's my claim, that there is nobody behind it. You say the properties of hydrogen and oxygen separately are not sufficient to explain the properties of water. Well, it depends upon what you mean by explain. I mean, what we can see is that whenever we combine hydrogen and oxygen in a certain way, we always get water. In other words, we always can start with the properties of hydrogen and the properties of water. We combine them in a certain way, we always get water with different properties. Now, isn't that, I mean, the sufficiency is there by the what you start out with and what you end up with. If you combine hydrogen and oxygen in a different way, you don't get water. Or if you combine hydrogen and nitrogen instead of hydrogen and oxygen, you get something different. So I think the question that you and I are getting at here is, how far can you go in explanation? What I'm suggesting is that there is an end to explanation. We should push it as far as we can push it. And I have no problem with that. I think if you're a truth-seeking person, you agree with the principle we should always go as far with explanation as we can possibly go. But what I'm suggesting is that here we're at the end of explanation. There's no good reason to think that we can go any further. And what you will end up admitting is that if we could get back further to a God, there would be a point we still would end with our explanation, that we could go no further. So explanation has an end. It's just that you and I disagree where the end is. You think it's in one place, I think it's in another place. I'm wondering, do you want to stop at this point, or you want to make a final statement?
I would like to make a final statement. I would like to say that basically hydrogen and oxygen, now according to scientific studies, that's not my knowledge, do not have sufficient properties or watery properties to produce water. What happened is, but you're right, every time two hydrogen and oxygen make a binding in a particular way, they always result in watery property, or they make water. That is just a regularity. That is not an evidence that actually hydrogen and oxygen themselves have the property to make water. So, and that's why I think the common mistake that we make, that regular observation, we see that is a sufficient evidence to say that if this happened on a regular basis, that means that this component has sufficient property. Now, we have a way to go further and study those properties of those components, and there are scientific studies clearly showing that